Hello there and welcome back to the channel. We are back in Strudel once again, and the last video was actually quite popular, so it shows me that people are really wanting to learn more about this program and are interested by it. There's also always a couple of sort of dislikes and comments from people not really understanding it, or they kind of don't really like the change that these new programs are gonna bring. And I do get that, but I would also say Strudel is just a very complicated way of making music, which unlocks loads of randomization and probabilities and things like that. But it's not changed the game as of yet. You know, stuff like modular hardware is very similar in some ways, where you're like locking things to scale and generating probabilities of events and note data. It's quite similar to that, but the amazing thing about Strudel is it's free. And there's a great kind of learning resource here that you can tap into and kind of search away. And I've basically just been walking through all of this stuff, and of course using Switch Angel's videos as an amazing resource to learn from.
The sound was a sawtooth wave, tamed with acid, controlled with a slider. Visualize the lead with piano roll. Next, kick drum, trance kick drum, 4 on the floor.
I think I had a comment yesterday of someone who wasn't a music producer or a coder, but had really been enjoying Strudel. So maybe there's a kind of opening there for people to just get in and make music using this program without any prerequisite knowledge at all. I'm probably in this sort of 50 to 100 hour of learning this program now. And I've had to overcome some pretty big hurdles that I was just wrestling with all the time, where I wasn't quite understanding what was going on. And so I'm going to try and address some of these in this video and kind of wrap all of that up into the umbrella term of break chopping. So it should be a really fun one to dive into. I've got lots to show you, and maybe we'll just start with a little bit of a recap of one of the fundamental things I think you've really got to try and grasp in Strudel, and that is the idea of cycles. And everything in Strudel, a lot of these functions revolve around this kind of cycle rate. And we set this at the start of our project with this set CPM. So CPM is cycles per minute. What I'm basically telling this project to do is to play Strudel at 140 beats per minute, and I want a cycle rate of 1 cycle is going to equal 1 bar. So that's what this little bit at the top here is saying. So I basically just mapped that to a very standard kind of musical framework that we use in all our other programs. And so that should be quite easy for a lot of you to understand. But maybe the best way to do this is actually to kind of visualize this. And if I create a new sound and I go hi-hat, and then I just go 1, what I'm essentially doing is saying this $sign and the colon is basically making a new instrument or a new voice, and then this is playing the sound or the sample of a hi-hat, and then the exclamation mark 1 is just going to play one of them per cycle. So if we come and put ._punch card, we can now see exactly what a 1 cycle rate is. And obviously if I increase the cycles per minute, everything's happening a lot quicker. So I hope that's making sense so far. What someone told me actually is a good way to mute one of these patterns is if you just put an underscore in front of the $sign, it's going to stop the whole pattern from playing. So that's a good way to kind of store them up. But actually we want to be able to see this kind of cycle rate going on. And a good thing to do here is you can use this function called post gain. And if I just put post gain to 0, that's essentially just going to mute this pattern, but it's going to do it right at the end. So it's actually going to happen after punch card, even though I've put it in front. Basically, it means we can now see this cycle rate happening all the time. If ever you're confused about or want to know more about what one of these functions is doing, you can also open this reference and just type in post gain, and you can see here gain applied after all effects have been processed.
The yucky days when metal is reborn and the sword enters the sword.
The first thing I actually need to do If I come in here and show you this kind of break chopping learning resource, if we come and look, they're just referencing kind of a GitHub of some classic breaks. And whilst these breaks are handy, if we can actually come in here, we can go into the GitHub and have a look at them. You can come and see all these kind of breaks in here. So these breaks are just the original breaks without any processing at the kind of standard tempo they were made at, which are cool to work from. But actually, I think it's a little bit easier if you sort of have quantized breaks and ones that have been dressed up a little bit more. And I do a lot of this on my Patreon, and I have sample packs which have these breaks in. So I'm just going to use one of them, and I'll put this on a public kind of GitHub so everyone can have access to it. Okay, so it took me a second there actually just to remember my steps, but in order to get the kind of samples into your project, you have to write it in a slightly different way that they've kind of said it in here. So you basically set the samples. You can actually put the samples right at the top and have it out the way. And then we're just referencing this kind of GitHub database. But what happens if you wanted to play another break other than the amen from here? Well, it's a little bit confusing. If we come in these, you can see, do you like put the whole username in? But actually, if you come into this Strudel.cc file, you can see the kind of reference. So you actually have to use like king here to play this break. That's cool if you want to use any of those, and these are probably still a good place to learn from, but I'm actually going to chuck in one of my own breaks. So rather than referencing this GitHub clean breaks, okay, so I found this link for my GitHub samples, and I need to just swap out, so it's now referencing my samples. And then if I come in here, I've kind of set up a JSON file for my one, so I can just copy think is what I want, and we're going to use a think break. If I just type in think, it should just work. Cool. And this think break was made at 168 BPM. It's been run through all my old hardware and kind of quantized nicely, so it's just going to work really well for slicing up inside of Strudel. Now, one thing you've probably noticed that's really annoying in the beginning is whenever I trigger this think break, and I stop it, it plays all the way to the end of the sample, which I find really annoying. So one of the first things I'm going to do is just actually put in ADSR and go in quotation marks 0, 0, 0, 0. And this first one's the attack, the second one's the decay, the third one's the sustain. We want to put on 1 and then release on 0. And this is going to mean that whenever we stop playback now, it's still going to play to the end of a cycle, but it's not going to just ring out to the end of the whole sample. So you're not going to get this kind of constantly ringing out drum breaks as you're kind of making them. The next thing to do is to start thinking about how we're going to chop this break. But actually, before you chop a break, usually you would warp it to your BPM. And in a lot of the examples, they use this .fit. And what .fit does is it's going to pitch up this think break. But it almost to me is double the pitch I actually want it. And if you come and look in fit in this reference, it says make the sample fit its event duration, good for rhythmical loops like drum breaks, similar to loopAt. Well, actually, if you come and look at loopAt is the same as fit, but it just gives you more control. And you can basically, I can put 1 in loopAt, and it's going to do the same thing that fit was doing. But if I put 2 in, now we've got the break actually at the right pitch. So it's kind of warped it to 2 cycles rather than 1. I could even go to 4 and sort of slow it down by another half. Which would be cool to like flip to for a more, half tempo. Maybe at like the end of a bar or something. But for now, I think loop at 2 is a good place to be. So we've basically warped a break that was 180 beats per minute, and we've slowed it down actually to make it, so it was faster, we've slowed it down to fit at 140 beats per minute. The next thing to do is to start slicing it up. And there's a few different approaches here in Strudel. You've either really got to go down this randomness, controlled randomness route, or you can sequence it a little bit more like you would in another program. And I've been having a lot of fun with both, actually. In some of the recipes they use, if we go into break chopping, they use this kind of chop thing quite a lot to slice the break up. But I actually, if you come and look at chop here, cuts each sample into a given number of parts, allowing you to explore a technique known as granular synthesis. It turns a pattern of samples into a pattern of parts of samples. So chop is cool, but actually slice gives you a little bit more control. It's similar to chop, but then you actually can choose to trigger those slices with a given pattern of slice numbers. So I've been having a lot more success with slice, and the first number we put in is how many like the resolution we want to slice this break up at. So usually you would do something kind of a multiple of 4, so 4, 8, 16, 32, something like that. But I think 8 will work pretty well here. And if I just go sort of 8, 0, it's now just going to trigger from the first slice of the break. Each cycle. What I could do is actually start to trigger different slices. So if I trigger the first slice of the break and then the third one, that's sounding pretty cool. Maybe we go back to the first one and then to the 5th slice. Okay, so something has happened here where we've thrown off that groove that we had, and this is because inside these quotation marks, every number I keep adding is trying to fit all of that information into one cycle. If I add more stuff, it's going to speed up even more. So now it's gone all weird and choppy, and that's not really what we want. The thing to do here is actually to come and put these greater than and less than arrows, and this is getting into a bit of mini notation. So what those arrows mean is that everything inside of them is going to, each number is going to happen at a rate of 1 per cycle. So we have the 0. So it kind of steps through these values, and what's really cool once you put these arrows in is you can keep adding more stuff and it still retains that same rate. So those ones are behaving a little bit weirdly at the end there, just because they sort of run out of sample. But this is cool. Now what's actually really handy in here is once you create these greater than less than arrows, you can actually use more mini notation. We can use the divide by 2, which is going to actually slow down that kind of rate. So each one's going to happen every 2 cycles. Or we can speed up by 2. So this is kind of, I think, a good rate for me to program at, this like half cycle rate. And so I can just keep adding more information in. Maybe we go 0, 2 and 0, 3. What it felt like me is it wanted to go like this. Nice. So that's a pretty kind of classic groove there. And I will say sequencing, even though drum and bass and breakbeat and this kind of stuff, it does sound to a lot of people, I think, completely random. It very rarely is. It's often much more controlled. There are these little bursts of kind of cool drum flourishes, but most of it is sequenced. And it's almost like you can't have a drummer just sort of showing off too much all the time, or a guitarist just like riffing. It gets quite tiring to listen to, so you want to sort of do some crazy break stuff, but also kind of control when and where it's happening. What's really cool with mini notation is you can start to put stuff in brackets and use these subgroups. Now if I just put a subgroup here with one bit of information, it's not going to change at all. So I could put a subgroup here as well, and it's still just playing usually. But if I start to add more information in the subgroup, so maybe I add 2 zeros, what it's trying to do is fit this subgroup's information into sort of this one cycle rate, or the half cycle rate that we've set for everything inside of these arrows. And I can keep adding more in here. And this really goes on and on. You can sort of create another subgroup, and if I do this, okay, so it's gone a little bit weird there, and this is because I've thrown off the balance of this subgroup. And what I mean by this is, before I had 4 hits, but when I went and put this in another subgroup, I actually condensed these 2 hits down to kind of a 1 hit speed almost in the way it plays through it. And so I essentially just have to add, I could add another 2 hits in a bracket like this to create a cool rolling effect. So now we've kind of balanced back out this pattern and it's rolling around well again. So you always have to sort of remember what you're doing with these subgroups to sort of keep it running at the correct rate you're sequencing at. It is confusing for sure, and I think the best thing to do is probably just have a crack at it yourself and kind of follow along with this example. One other really cool thing we can do with subgroups is we can use these multipliers at the end of it. So I could go, say, what happens if I divided this subgroup by half? So this is everything inside these brackets is going to get basically slowed down in the way it sequences. So you may have noticed there, what actually happens is it just doesn't play through the whole thing. It plays the first half of the sequence the first time, and then the second half of the sequence the second time round. And so this is really cool because you can create variations kind of as your patterns evolve. You can create variations in different ways. What I think I actually wanted was a sort of really basic kick drum, that just a single kick drum, and then maybe the fill coming in later. So let's see if I can just figure out how to program this. It would actually have to be -4, I think. And it's just going to play a single kick. And then what we need to do is maybe make this one a bit more interesting. Here we go. Let's do something like this. Nice. So the last one I think just wants to be a cool. It almost wants to go like dung 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 cha. So I want to try and see if I can sequence this in, and that would be putting a subgroup on this last one and maybe just having a note like that. And I also noticed that this one could have been maybe something like this. So these are a little bit scrappy. Maybe this one wants to go to 1, this one wants to go to 4. I can also hear this last group. I think I want to do something of the same, where if I divide by 2 and I want one sequence, I want it to play through 3, and then I want it to do a roll maybe at the end as well. Yeah, that was cool. Okay, so I've been messing with this for a minute now, and it's definitely, if you're a beginner, this is probably looking quite overwhelming, but you do quite quickly I'm only really using these subgroups is the main thing here. There's lots of other types of minion notation and things you can do, but actually you can just what I'm really trying to do is control the speed that everything's happening in these sequences. And sort of make things happen on the second and third repetition. Ooh. Nice. So that's one method, and that's probably the way I would do it a lot of the time, is to sequence things more like this. But you can use more randomization, and I've found another kind of cool way we can combine randomization and sequencing. So once again, we're going to use slice, but this time we're going to use irand, and we're going to go and put, I've got to put this slice 8 again, and then I use irand 8 as well, and then I've got to go and put in .seg. So now what we've basically said is we're going to slice into 8 parts, and then we're going to randomize the kind of order of all those slices, and then we're going to kind of quantize that to 8 points per cycle. And that's already given me a pretty awesome result. I mean, it's completely random at the moment, so we could try and harness some of this randomization, and .rib is a really cool thing to do. So if we just put the first one as 1, I want to maybe do 2 cycles worth. Rib is just taking a kind of a chunk of time, so all this randomization is happening over time, and it's just going to take a segment of it, 2 cycle segment, and then it's just going to kind of loop that bit, and then we can choose sort of where we come and extract this ribbon of time from. So I could try this first number, you just sort of mess with it. You could put 120. I'm just testing sort of different. I like that shuffle where it's going. So I think this is a cool part. And the next thing I want to show you is this function called byte. And this isn't really talked about very much in the recipes. I think if you come in here and type in byte, it's not even going to come up with anything. But actually, it's kind of perfect for resampling your breaks in this way. So byte works very similar to slice. But what byte does is, rather than slice is looking at a sample, and then you're saying what's the resolution you want to slice it up at, and then you get a sequence those slices. Byte is looking at a pattern, and so you kind of take a sample of a pattern, and then you can sequence kind of chops of that. So maybe if I slice this pattern up, and we're basically slicing whatever the ribbon we've extracted, we're now going to slice up that ribbon. So I can say byte 16, comma, and then I can start to sequence. So if I just go 0, let's put this in quotation marks and actually put these greater than and less than arrows in right from the beginning. So that's fine and good. Maybe I speed up the rate as well. So what's maybe confusing you a little bit is because I've taken a 2 ribbon extraction, it's kind of, it's not repeating in the way you would maybe think. If I put this to 1, I think it'll make more sense. And now we can just sort of trigger these chops. So they're all sounding pretty cool. I want to find a groove that's maybe starts with a kick. I think you get the idea. You can do so much cool sort of randomization and then resequencing that and controlling it in some way. I mean, it's really it's pretty crazy. But what I'm actually trying to teach here, more than the break chopping almost, is this mini notation, and really just how you can use these sub patterns and multipliers to sort of control the rate of all these the kind of slices in this break is what I'm using it for here. The cool thing about using randomization over sequencing maybe is that I can just change this rib number and it will give me a completely different result in whatever I'm doing with byte. So remember I've got 250. I could even swap. I could even do some kind of mini notation in rib and go from 250 to 20. mean, that's sounding actually pretty wild. Maybe I do the same thing and start to program in rib and go sort of backwards. I think I might have to times by 2. Yeah. So that's cool. Maybe it goes to 40 and then 70. Let's just try this. Whoa. I like this. Yeah. I really like that. I almost want it to do this one sequence and then come and do something different the next time. Maybe like 70, just to make it not so repetitive. We'll just do it random. Nice.